Hi, this is Trash Dev, I'm Tapioca. This is episode 5 of my series about developing Lakeside, a fishing adventure RPG. In the last episode, I came back from a 2-month hiatus to reveal that I worked on basically nothing important. After finishing that, I felt ready to start working on the content of the game, and just to jinx myself, I said that's what I'd be doing in the next video. Well, this is the next video, so you'll see how that plan went. This isn't for a while, but my goal is to have a playable demo of the game ready next year, hopefully in the first half of the year. As I'm writing this, Steam Next Fest is going on, so it's just got me thinking about things. And while I don't think my embarrassing trash is remotely good enough to be blasted out to the uncaring world on Steam, itch.io might be a better fit. I have an idea of how much of the game would need to be finished for a good demo, and it's still kind of far away. Anyway, just something to keep in mind. So I realized pretty quickly after starting that I wasn't quite as ready as I thought I was. Fishing bait and Lucky Charms still don't actually exist, and when you catch a fish, it just disappears into the void instead of entering into some kind of inventory. I put this store on the map because I want to do some stuff with it, but there's no shop interface, or money, so I spent some time working on things like that and putting the finishing touches on the editor, just to make sure the process would be as painless as possible. Here's the changelog. Bait and Lucky Charms now exist. They're both essentially empty items, and the logic that makes them work gets written in other places. In Bait's case, that's the frequency functions referenced in the fish.json file I made the editor for back in episode 2, and in Charm's case, we'll get to that later, don't worry about it. The fish you catch now actually save to your inventory. I threw together this menu to show what you've got, which I'll definitely need to replace with something more custom later. I got carried away and also made this wildlife guide menu. It's basically the Pokédex, which fills in as you see and catch each type of fish. I want to add more info on each fish's page later, like the size distribution and where they can be found. You can now actually equip things. It turns out I hadn't programmed this item menu quite right the first time around, and it was full of other unrelated bugs too. Also, I realized this menu is way too small to fit all the text it needs, so this is gonna get reworked from scratch soon. I updated game saves to actually store everything in them now, since I had fallen behind on that and some things were missing and not getting saved. Tile properties like texture and collision are now exposed to the scripting API. This is good for scripts that need something to happen in the world, like opening a door or building a bridge. I fixed the copy-paste bug alluded to in the last video. It was literally just an issue with overlapping keybinds, and it took about 2 minutes to solve. I eventually landed on this scripting syntax for how to make doors work. I could spend a lot of time talking about how much this sucks, but for now I'm gonna spare you. The background color you sometimes see in maps can now be set per layer, which should make some interiors look better. I also found out that I was drawing it in a really stupid way, so I fixed it. Finally, I added a number of smaller features to the editor that should have already existed but didn't, including a new map button, auto-saving, and the ability to move the player. After all that was done, I could finally start actually doing content dev. I see all work on the game as being broken up into 2 categories, engine development and content development. Engine dev is the hard work of implementing the mechanics, drawing everything on screen, all the subsystems like UI, audio, the scripting API, that kind of stuff. Up until now, that's pretty much all I've been doing. Content dev is creating all the parts that make the game, like making the levels, creating the art assets, and writing the NPC scripts. For the most part, this is work done using the tools that I created for myself during engine dev, so that's why that has to be done first. The content development workflow starts with the writing. I've always had a general idea of the plot of the game, but it's time to drill down and work out the specifics. I plan to split the game into distinct chapters, so each chapter can be worked on separately, and today I'll be starting with the introductory chapter. The writing process has 2 steps. First, the plain English description of what happens, and second, what I'm calling the scenario, is translating that into a specific list of actions and interactions done by the player. This will help a ton during the scripting step later, and it'll also give me a really clear picture of what assets I need to make. When I started writing, it was this step that made me realize I had to do all the stuff I talked about earlier. Here's the scenario for Chapter 1. Based on this, I can tell that I need to make some changes to my existing town map, and I'll also need to create a new forest map. Starting with the town, I widened the map a bit to fit this extra house in, added a door for the forest entry, and changed the exit out to the overworld a bit. I made the park bigger to try to cover this giant grass field I created, but there's still a lot of open space here that's kind of awkward, I think. Now it's time to make the forest map. Here's the convoluted way I design maps. First, I freehand draw a crappy sketch in Paint. It doesn't have to make any sense with the limitations of the engine, I'll translate it later. This is just the concept art phase, and a time to figure out the general shape and look of the map. Next, I get out a pen and graph paper and try to draw what the map will actually look like in-game. The point of doing this is so that I know what the layout's gonna be once I open the map editor, and to determine what tiles I'm gonna need. This could probably be done more efficiently on a computer rather than pen and paper, but my brain works better this way, just go with it. Next, I need to make the tile sheet, which is every unique square I drew during the last step in 16 by 16 pixel art form. Some of these I could copy over from the town sheet, and in general I don't actually need that many different tiles to create the entire map. For non-square things like the windmill in town or the water wheel in this forest, I can just draw a freehand on top of the tile sheet and then place those tiles down in the same way on the map. And finally, it's time to actually make the map using the in-game map editor. While that's happening in the background, I just want to ramble unscripted a bit about the writing process. So, I didn't realize this until I started writing, but I don't think I've ever actually written anything before. Like, I don't think I've ever had to create a story from scratch, start to finish. There was no creative writing in school, I've never done it as a hobby, so I'm really bad at it. So my plan is to try to keep things simple. Fishing is simple and mostly just a comfy, relaxing activity, so the plot of the game should also match that. It should also be simple, comfy, relaxing, those sorts of things. And as well, this sort of works with the fact that my inspiration is mostly older, like NES, Game Boy Color, that type of RPG. I grew up with the Dragon Quest Game Boy Color games, and that's obviously a big inspiration, at least obvious to me. It's probably not obvious to anyone else. And those all had very simple stories as well, sort of tech limitations were at play there. So that's kind of what I'm going for. I want to write a story that works in the ways that matter and doesn't really overcomplicate things, which is a nice way of saying that it's going to be very basic and not wholly original. So what is the plot of Lakeside anyway? I've never talked about this. I've been leading you all on for 5 episodes, and no one has any idea what the game is about. So I guess I'll explain now. Please don't make fun of me in the comments. So, the world of Lakeside is a big lake, like probably not Great Lake-sized big lake, but like a pretty damn big lake with a number of towns around it. And every summer, all kinds of people flood into these towns, and everyone in this world is totally obsessed with fishing. Think about how in like a Pokemon game, the entire world just seems to be structured around Pokemon battles for some reason. In this world, everything is all about fishing. Everyone is obsessed with fishing. And every year, there's a big fishing tournament held in one of the towns. And winning this thing is like a massive deal. You are an absolute celebrity if you win the big fishing tournament. It's being the Pokemon champion. I'm ripping off Pokemon if you couldn't tell by now. 5 episodes deep if you couldn't tell yet. So, you play as a kid who lives in the smallest town in the lake, which is all the way on the other side of the lake from the big one where they hold the tournament every year. And you live in town, there's a few other people there, you've got a childhood friend character, you live with your mom, dad died some years prior to the start of the game, don't worry about it. And one day, you find an old box in the attic, and in that box is a bunch of fishing gear and pictures and trophies. And it turns out that when your dad was younger, he was like an absolute fishing legend. He won the big tournament 10 years in a row, and he is one of the most famous fishermen, and you had no idea. So inspired by that, and given that you've got all of his old gear, which worked so well from him, you decide to set out and win the big fishing tournament. And the only problem with that plan is that it's in a week, and you've never caught a fish in your life. You do not care about fishing up until this point. So you set off on your quest around the lake to become a master fisherman and win the big tournament. So the way the game is going to be structured is it's going to be an episodic thing, like I said. So there are 7 towns around the lake, and each chapter will be you showing up in a town and then going through some kind of story there before moving on to the next town. And maybe for reasons you'll have to backtrack to towns you've already been to as well. but each town will sort of have its own self-contained story where you have to catch fish, talk to people, solve puzzles, get new items, use items, all that type of stuff in order to advance. So some things you might have to do are, you enter into a practice tournament and the town bully is cheating to win, so you have to learn how to cheat even harder to beat him back. Or there's a commercial fish farm that you have to defeat because it's putting all of the local fishermen out of business. Or a celebrity chef is in town filming a TV show and you have to impress him, that kind of thing. And of course at the end of the game you'll arrive in the big town and enter the big tournament, but I'm not going to spoil the ending. I do know what the ending is going to be, but I'm not going to spoil it, so you're just going to have to play the game for yourself if I ever actually finish it. Okay, I made the forest. At some point, I finished transcribing the map exactly as I had drawn it on paper, but I realized it wasn't filling the full width of the screen, and overall I just really didn't like the shape of it. It came out a lot smaller than I thought it was going to, so I went back in, resized some things, and moved stuff around freehand. Now the map looks a lot more like I had pictured it in my head. Next I had to make all the interiors for the houses in town. I didn't bother planning this out on paper, and instead just guessed at what tiles I was gonna need and then got to work. This affirmed that I hate designing maps this way and that doing it on paper first is the right call. I did this thing where the interiors are placed on the screen in the same place where the player would be when they walked through the door, so they aren't always centered. The point is that the viewer stays looking at the right place on screen through a scene transition, kinda like how in movies when they try to maintain the screen direction through cuts. I think this came out looking really stupid though, so I might just make all the interiors centered. I know I haven't finished the map yet, but I'm gonna stop here for now. The next thing to do is to create all the fish in the fish tables using the editor I made back in episode 2, then to create and script all the NPCs. That's gonna take a ton of time, especially because I left that editor unfinished, so I don't want to lump it all in with this video, which is already long enough. I can't help but feel like I'm gonna get about 5 minutes into working on this, and then realize that my entire scripting API is bad or something and needs reworking. Actually, I already kind of think this, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.